I can tell you about it, right?
I will tell you, I would love to hear about the Wegmans and how all that went down, because I used to attend the meetings when Area Health wanted to go into that corner piece, and how the folks gathered together and fought it and fought it and fought it. So I was, like a hospital would be the worst thing in the world to have with our growing population and aging population. But just out of curiosity, can you give us like a quick run over of how that all progressed?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it's going quite smoothly. We are in final site plan approvals for what will be a mixed-use project of some 200 residential apartment units, the Wegmans itself, and an additional, I think, 45 or 50,000 feet of retail, all organized around the central open space where the sort of the two main Prickett buildings are being preserved. So instead of sort of a conventional, strip center, it's really sort of almost more like a town center.
Yeah, I've seen those plans. They're awesome. Have they had any luck leasing up the retail space?
Yeah, they have. They've had lots of interest from lots of restaurants. And I know they have a signed lease from a bank. They're working with a pharmacy as well. But the Wegmans is what's driving the main deal. But we're really proud of it, because what could have been just another suburban conventional strip center traffic inducer, I think really will be a really special place with people who can walk to it and whatnot. Mary, you still haven't gotten it yet?
I have it. I'm working on it.
Okay, good. So if I could share my screen, I'd show you. I'd share that plan as well. It really has been it's been a great experience. The developers are really good people. We work with pretty much almost every developer in the region, and these are some of the best. It's not every day that you have them that have developers that have the real best interests of the community at heart. And I think this is going to be a real nice place for Lower Makefield, and in an area that's been very, very difficult, as you mentioned, to get projects approved. There's been a real sort of anti-development mentality up there for quite a while, even though the infrastructure is in place, right? I mean, where else do you see a huge highway interchange with grass?
Couldn't agree more.
Right. I mean, it's a little weird, especially someplace in the busy Northeast corridor like that. So while she's bringing that up,
I'm not having any luck with this.
You can't share it. I mean, you're
Connect to Wi-Fi network. I am connected. Tap screen monitoring. Screen mirror.
Beth, can I ask you a question? You mentioned restaurants, and this is Lower Makefield, correct?
Yeah.
Are they making any exception on the liquor license stand?
You know what? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I would imagine
curious.
they would if they're getting the kind of interest they are.
Yeah. I know that's always been an issue there.
That's a good question, because Wegmans does sell wine and 12 packs and 6 packs of beer as well. So that would be kind of necessary. It's a big portion of their store.
It is.
I think the only place you can buy alcohol in Lower Mayfield, correct me if I'm wrong, is their own, the golf course that they own. They made an exception for themselves.
No, McCaffrey's has their own.
They do.
McCaffrey's has their one inside. Yeah, they were one of the few that were able to get that inside. And I'm sure they can't be very happy about Wegmans. I know they've been trying to fight Wegmans and the like for many, many years. But I don't know. Sometimes competition's good.
Nope.
Probably good for all the
Can't do it.
consumers.
Yeah, Mary, you are sharing your screen. There's just nothing up.
Yeah, I can't make it happen. You know what it is? I'm using the work computer and my personal iPad. So I'm in way over my head with this. I'm just a member of the committee and I said I'd take notes. I'm stuck.
Now, if I put a mask on and jump in my car and drive over there and help with that, I mean, I'm only a few minutes away.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna ask Olivia to come in and try to help me.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
but meanwhile, keep talking. We're all interested.
Yeah.
Why
it's-
don't we
it's good
move on to
stuff.
something else? If we're gonna just wait.
Yeah.
You would have to send your PowerPoint to Olivia if it's going to be on the computer that Mary's using.
Okay, I'll do
Share the
that
screen.
right now.
Or Mary, you can send it to Olivia's email address.
That's what I'm doing.
But you would need a, Olivia would need to open it up, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna call her right now. I'm texting her.
Yeah, she would then just need
She's
to
here
down.
in the office. She's just not in the room with me.
Then
Don't forget to put your mask back on.
I know.
So I guess if we can, is there anything that we're able to continue on with that discussion about the Wegmans there, or is it really kind of, hinging on having the PowerPoint there as a visual aid?
No, it kind of is. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a little bit of a history of zoning, but maybe we do the listening part first. So what is it that you guys are really interested in learning about in terms of this particular portion of your township? I mean, are you looking to think about that there should be some kind of overlay rezoning of it? What's the impetus for the conversation, I guess, is the question.
Can you explain what you mean by overlay rezoning? I've heard that often and I'm not completely familiar with why that is used, how it is used, what it means.
So what an overlay does is it provides another method of allowing some uses where uses aren't necessarily permitted, but also keeps the underlying zoning in place.
Look at what I did to the screen.
So the underlying light industrial zoning stays in place, but an overlay is put on top of that zone that says, if you do these things, you can do this. So if you provide X amount of open space, you can do this. If your parcel is this size, you can do this. It sort of allows for some flexibility. And that's the beauty of it, is that it also keeps the underlying zoning in place, so you're not changing uses on people who have bought parcels and who have bought land with the expectation of the zoning that's already there.
So,
Isn't it
we're a member of a jointure and all the zoning has to be approved by the 3 other townships, not including Lower Mayfield, Upper Mayfield. But if with an overlay, does it have to go through the same process where the 3 townships have to agree to all these conditions?
I don't know the answer to that. That would be something that I think your township solicitor would have to answer. I don't. That's a very good question. I mean, the Bucks
And
County Planning Commission would certainly want to weigh in. They're advisory only. But
So I know that in the LI district and some things that the board has done in land development, and I think there was one development there where we asked to put in a sidewalk. I guess, you can include things like that as a condition.
correct.
Right, okay, thank you.
Seth, it sounds like what you described is a zoning variance. I guess there's some kind of slight difference, or
It's a way of avoiding a zoning variance, because now it's not a variance, it's an as of right use.
huh?
And it's a way for the township itself to sort of control the narrative
All right.
versus a variance, which, a variance, legally, you have to show some kind of actual hardship to get a variance.
Well,
Okay.
that's not been very difficult in Newtown, and as far as I'm concerned, if we keep it out of the hands of the zoning hearing board, all the better.
Yes, the less time I spend in front of zoning hearing boards, the better. That's just for me personally.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good luck there, but ideally, we try to avoid it. And that's one of the reasons why I had this little presentation set up, because the conversation is really about challenging what is traditional something called Euclidean zoning, which sort of rules the day around here, which is zoning based on land use, on actual uses. When zoning was put in place, we were all about separating the uses for health, safety, and general welfare. That was because the economy was based in industry, an industrial, background. That's no longer the case in the 21st century. And when you separate the uses, you get one thing that I can guarantee: traffic, right? If you force everybody to drive everywhere they go, because all of the uses are separated, that's what you get. We now know better. We now know there's a better way, but there is an ingrained 50, 60, 70, 80 years of a development economy based on single use zoning. So you have residential developers, you have commercial developers, you have retail developers, you have office developers, but you don't have guys that do residential over retail or office. And you're constantly sort of fighting that inertia, even though the kinds of places that people like to go to and people like to be at are pedestrian oriented. I think we might have some luck. Yay!
Yay!
Okay,
Okay,
hit present.
okay. If you want me to move on to the next slide, just from now on, Seth, just say next slide.
Right, but we're still on the slide mode. Can you hit the present button?
Upper right.
Upper right, go to the upper right.
Uh,
No,
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 no, down,
no.
down,
Next to
left,
the orange box.
left,
Right there, hit share.
no,
Further, no,
Yeah. Wait, what?
Here's click.
no. Cancel that.
To the
Present,
left of the
present.
orange box, to the
What?
left of the box.
Oh, for-
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Full
perfect.
screen, it said escape.
There you go. Let's just leave
What
it
do
at
you
this.
guys see? Are we okay yet?
Yeah, you're
Hit
good.
escape. Oh, no.
No, hit
Sorry.
present again.
I'm sorry.
All right, I see what I want to see. Are you seeing it?
It's real
Yeah.
tiny.
Yes,
You can't
yeah,
read it.
if you can, please hit present again up in the top right hand. That will enlarge the thing, because the way we're viewing it, it'll be slightly
Okay.
shrunken down, but
There
that makes it readable.
Okay,
Okay.
do you have the full screen of Seth and his resume?
Yes,
Yep, that's what we see.
okay.
But I need the bar with the pages. Don't
No,
I?
you don't.
Just hit the
Okay,
pen.
I can just,
Hit the down button, right. See, there you go.
okay,
You can even
I
click
got
it
it.
from here.
I'm good.
Okay, let's go back to the resume.
Okay, we're on. That's not what you wanted?
No, I want the resume. Back up.
Okay, there you are.
Okay, so that's me. I am the director of planning and urban design here. I'm a principal. I've been with the firm for 13 years as of yesterday.
Congratulations.
And so I am one of 5 owners of this firm. You can go to the next. So I'll just actually a little bit about me. I actually grew up in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Miami School of Architecture, so I'm trained as an architect. The day after I graduated from school in Miami, I was on 95 on my way back. Miami is a great place to visit. It's a really tough place to live. I much like the sort of the real city and the walkability that we have here, though Miami's now since become actually quite a real city. Spent a couple years working at a firm called Wallace, Roberts and Todd in Philadelphia before going to graduate school. I have a Master of Architecture in Urban Design with a focus on development. I received that from the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. And then I moved to New York, where I worked for 4 years at a firm called Cooper Robertson. Following that, I went back to WRT. And then 13 years ago, I came here to run my own planning and urban design group. So here at BartonPartners, that's actually the picture of the building that we are in now. We have the entire 3rd floor of this building in Norristown. It's actually a fabulous space here. Actually, you can probably see like the roof, right? See that?
Oh, I thought you wanted me to change the
No,
picture.
we're
Okay.
good. So, So we are about a 43, 44 person firm. We are specialists in multifamily housing, mixed use. We do retail as well, commercial, but we're really known as sort of residential specialists. As I said, I run the planning and urban design group. And one of the things about BartonPartners is that we're not sort of really divided into affinity groups or studios. We all really work together. And the way the firm works is I'm working on projects now that maybe the architects in this office will be working on in 2 years, which means Paul will be working on in 3 years, and then we'll be occupied in 5 years. So you got to be a little patient. And so I'm the person who generally is in front of groups like you or the boards of commissioners, the planning commissioners, hopefully not the zoning hearing boards, to get projects approved. So if you've been on some of those Lower Makefield calls, you've heard me present it, because I will be the person presenting the project. Next slide. Oh, back one. There you go. So as I said, we offer sort of all of these services, and I run the urban design group. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit about zoning. So I want to take you sort of back to the turn of the century. And by the turn of the century, I mean the 19th to the 20th century. And this was sort of a shot of what cities looked like, right? They were sort of crowded, they were sort of dirty. There was really no land use regulation whatsoever. And, you know, things proceeded this way for a good first part of the 20th century as the country went from sort of agrarian, right, sort of farm, to industrial. This is during the massive industrial revolution, and things were going along fine. You know, there were different economic crises and whatnot, but then something happened right around the end of World War I. Can you hit just the down button again? Nope. There you go. So a funny thing happened in 1917, and it continued for a year and a half or 2 years. And, you know, it would probably never happen again, but there was this pandemic, right? And it was worldwide, and there were these multi-phases of peaks and valleys, and it killed more people than the Black Death. And it struck randomly, it seemed, and it killed, you know, something like 40 million people. It was horrible, and it was quick, and it was striking healthy people. There know nothing about these comorbidities, and, you know, there were no antibiotics or anything like that. So I have a theory that a lot of land use regulation, in terms of the separation of uses under the guise of health, safety, and general welfare, actually was spawned by this event, okay? Which is interesting to think about where we are now. Next slide. So even before this, so at the beginning of the century, for the first 20 years of the century, and even back into the 19th century, there were sort of intellectuals thinking about what's the best way to develop our land. You know, there's always revolutions in transportation. Obviously, railroads were critical at this time. You know, how do we best use our land? The nation is growing, there's lots of immigration, we need to put people places, we have all this land. What is the best way to do this? And so there was this idea of these garden cities of tomorrow. So that you could combine the best, nope, stay there. You could combine the best of town and country, you know, to living and working in the smoke, living in the suburbs, working in the smoke. Maybe in the future you could live someplace and work in the same place. And so there were all these sort of diagrams of books, and Ebenezer Howard was one of the main guys who went through this. Now you can go to the next slide. So lots of thought about land planning. This is when sort of land planning became a profession. And here you can see some diagrams, like the idea of the central city that's connected by intermunicipal railways to little towns, these little garden cities, and everything's sort of linked by those transportation networks. And inside those cities and inside those towns were made up of neighborhoods. And you can see this neighborhood here, where they have different uses, but everything's relatively close together. There's sort of a grid of streets, not necessarily rectilinear, but there's lots of streets. There's arterials, but there's middle streets, and there's lots of different ways to get places. There's community centers, there's parks. And that's sort of how places sort of evolved, you know, from say the 1880s and through the 1920s. Next slide. Nope. And so we see these places. Now, these are some pictures of Bucks County and Newtown in general. Newtown's a little bit older, but that's how these areas generally developed. They were really sort of mixed use neighborhoods. And everything was within walking distance. Next slide. Then, because I think of that flu epidemic, because of the way that we were this industrialized society and there were really no regulations on how land was used, something happened called zoning. And as you can see on the chart on the left, this is sort of the rise of zoning in the United States between 1904 and 1930, the number of active zoning codes in the United States. There were almost none at the turn of the century. By 1930, that's only the first half of 1930. There were close to 1,600 zoning codes. And so the quintessential case, excuse me, that made zoning legal was something called the City of Euclid v. Ambler Realty. And that's why we refer to things as Euclidean zoning. It has nothing to do with geometry. It has nothing to do with Euclid, as we all know. Euclid is actually a town in Ohio to the east of Cleveland. And basically what happened is Ambler Realty, big bad real estate developer, comes in and says they want to do this with their land. And the City of Euclid says, no. We have a zoning code in place. You can't do that with the land. And they argued back and forth, and the lawyers got rich, and it went to the Supreme Court. And at the Supreme, and by the way, I'm oversimplifying this almost criminally, but just keep that in mind. The Supreme Court said, yes, it is legal for a local municipality to regulate land use under the guise of life, health, safety, and general welfare, and it being consistent with a comprehensive plan, which is something that a lot of people forget, consistent with a comprehensive plan. So zoning became the rule of the day, and Euclidean zoning is based entirely on separating land uses. You cannot, it's almost like a pyramid where you can do, at the top, you can only do residential. In the next zone, you can do some slightly denser residential or the less dense residential. And then all the way at the bottom, you have industrial, where you can do whatever you want. And it looks, next slide. So in many ways, Euclidean zoning looks like this. Now, this is your township, right? This is, and you see the colors. The colors are land uses, and we've separated them. And we continue to separate them based on an economic system that no longer exists, right? We're a service-based economy. We're not an industrial-based economy. So why would we separate all these uses? Because all that does is make people get in their cars to drive places. And that was actually very intentional after World War II, because our economy was actually an auto economy, right? I mean, it supported the country in many ways. So it persisted on and on and on and on until it no longer became sort of the dominant thing. Next slide. So this is a map of Pennsylvania and all of the little municipalities in Pennsylvania. Zoning is done at the local level. So what you just said was interesting about your zoning needs to be approved by your surrounding townships. That's pretty rare. Usually zoning is like these little fiefdoms within the townships. And actually you can see in Bucks County, you can see your township, you can see Lower Midfield to the right of it, and you can see the borough of Newtown sort of as a little dot in the middle there, and Newtown has its own zoning, even though you surround it. So, you know, be that as it may, it's federalism at its most purest sense, right? That land use is at the very, very local level, even though transportation is not at the local level. Transportation is regional. You know, air quality is regional. So it's an interesting problem. And by the way, as close as Delaware, zoning is done at the county level. Maryland, it's done at the county level. So it's very, you know, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, all done at the local level, not at the county level. Next slide. So this is what we get. right? This is what the logical end game of Euclidean zoning is you have residential sprawl, you have everything is automobile dominated, you have to drive everywhere. There's no, you put a fire hydrant right, so there's no thought to sort of pedestrianism. Even when it comes to some architecture, like on the upper right, I mean, the entire front of a house is a garage door. So that became sort of the major land use of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. But things did actually begin to change a little bit. People rediscovered cities. There's a whole piece of the presentation that goes into that, but I want to skip through that right now because what I want to show you is something that even simplifies this even further. So next slide. Nope, back up one. Nope, other way. Stop there. Down one. One hit, stop. Okay, so this is a great diagram that sort of highlights the issue that we have, right? This is typical single land use suburban sprawl, right? You have your retail, your mall, you have one density of residential separated by another density of residential, and then you have your school. And the only way to get from one place to the other is to go out onto that arterial, right? Onto the bypass. And then people wonder, gee, where'd all this traffic come from? Now hit one down. Maybe there's a better way, right? So at the bottom of that diagram is what we call a traditional neighborhood. Okay, it's the same exact land use, it's the same exact number of homes, the same exact amount of program as what's on the top of that. So maybe there's a different way of thinking about zoning that's not so much based on use, but based on something called form. Okay, so if you look at the upper right, on the sort of upper half of this slide, I want you to hit the down button one more time. Here's Newtown. Looks kind of like the upper half of that slide, right? Really does. So people have gotten together, and this has been happening for now 30 or 40 years. Is there a different kind of zoning that's not use-based, but it's called form-based? And it utilizes something called a transect. Next slide. So what this is that these are the zones. It's not based on use, but it's based more on densities and intensities of uses and building heights and building types. Forget the uses, right? We don't have to worry about someone setting up a tannery in our neighborhood. That's over. And so it works like this, and there are different types of streets that are permitted and different types of roadway widths, and we pay attention to the spaces in between the buildings. And that, this has been put in place in a lot of areas, but it doesn't necessarily work in places that are already developed, mostly because a transect really ought to go from, say, Berks County, natural zone, to Center City, urban zone. And to do that, you have to cross 50 municipalities. And how are you going to do that, right? So it really doesn't necessarily work in this kind of environment. So that is what we've left with. What we've left with is where we actually started today, which is what we do here is we provide things called overlays. And what the overlays do is allow additional uses into zones that were only permitted single use. And you can get those additional uses by doing other things, by doing things like providing a certain amount of open space or linear feet of street. So next slide. This is the last slide. This is what I was told you guys were interested in talking about. This is your sort of your light industrial area with the bypass, and obviously the athletic club, which is the big anchor to this area, Lower Makefield to the right, and the borough obviously to the upper left. So with that, I'm here to listen to you guys.
So I guess the first question would be, as far as that, like the LI and the OLI districts, Would you have any suggestions as far as like, would there be a general transition, or would it just be, it goes right to that other, alternative model? Would that be more of the trend that you're seeing, I guess, with those community type places? Like I know you'd mentioned the one with the shops and then the homes above that and mixed in. Would that be, the trend that it's moving towards then?
It is and it isn't. There's still economic issues associated with that, specifically in financing and leasing. But what you can do is what we did in Lower Makefield. The Lower Makefield is an overlay for that district. Again, it leaves the underlying stuff in place, but it gives you incentives for doing other things. We should probably leave that last slide up, Mary, just so we can have
Okay,
that.
hold on, everybody.
There you
That
go.
it?
Yay.
That the one you want? Okay.
Yep.
See, I'm learning a lot today.
Good work.
And in this case, the overlay would go from the bypass up to Washington. It would cover all of those. And it may even say, there's I don't know, there's probably 50 or 60 different parcels here, but it would only apply to parcels of a certain size, right?
I have a question. In general, in municipalities, how often should they be updating their uses? For instance, we have some in, besides the LI, which, we all know there's no industrial uses anymore, and things have evolved. But there are certain other areas too that things haven't changed, from what I'm told, since the 70s.
So I believe townships are required to update their comprehensive plan every 10 years.
I think of this committee, I've been around the longest. We adopted the comp plan for the jointure, the 3 municipalities that zone together, in 1983. And it has been updated every 10 years.
Yeah, I think you have to legally update it every 10 years. And by the way, updating it may be opening it, saying this is good, closing it again. But I think it has to be looked at every 10 years. And remember, zoning is supposed to be commensurate with a comprehensive plan. Generally, the way you do is you plan first and then you zone to that plan.
Yes, we are currently updating the plan right now.
Yeah, we're a year overdue because of the pandemic, but yeah, it's been.
And there are firms, by the way, that do that. My firm does not do comprehensive plans. What we do is vision plans, which can then inform a comprehensive plan, but we don't actually do the actual heavy comprehensive plans. I mean, I would imagine, I don't know who's doing your comprehensive plan update. Is it the county itself?
Yes, the Bucks County Planning Commission.
Right, that's generally what's been happening. That it's been moving towards sort of more of the planning commissions themselves doing the updates.
I believe ours is the only jointure in the state.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's very rare. Very, very rare.
When does a jointure be? Well, I don't know if this is relevant. I'll skip that.
Seth, do you think a jointure is generally a good thing in theory, that because it promotes cooperation and kind of uniformity and,
It
is
does. I would say it does, but I think it has to include, what is the center of that share, right? I mean, what is it? Is it grouped around a piece of infrastructure? There's one thing to have like 3 different municipalities that they may share a border, but are they surrounding something? Like, you just told me that Lower Makefield wasn't part of it, right?
No,
Right.
See, to me, just from 30,000 feet, that doesn't make sense, because you're very much linked to Lower Makefield. I mean, they're right on the other side of the bypass, right?
the bypass did not exist when the jointure was formed.
Correct. Now it's there, and now it is the primary piece of infrastructure here that I think is driving a lot of land use. So for me, if you were going to do that today, I think it would be Lower Makefield, Upper Makefield, Newtown, and the borough itself, right? That would be maybe even over to Yardley, right? That would be the area.
The borough used to be in the jointure, but they quit. And the jointure really consists of, it's another way of separating the zoning, if you ask me, because Wrightstown is basically the quarry. Upper Makefield is basically the horse farms. And Newtown has all the other kind of commercial zoning and high-density housing. So that is a super separation of zoning, if I'm listening to you correctly.
And in that case, what's the point?
Yeah,
Right.
so if you want to visit the quarry, you're going to have to drive. But nobody wants to visit a quarry. But if
Yeah.
they want to shop, they come to Newtown, which is good for Newtown.
Right. Well, I mean, I wonder what that means for the there's not a joint taxation authority, right? I mean, in terms of property taxes. So I
No.
would think that Upper Makefield might be getting the short end of that stick.
I don't know. They like it the way it is.
Yeah, I
They
mean, it really depends on local tax structures. I mean, I've seen some that I don't understand.
But try to do some commercial development in Upper Mayfield, and you thought you had a problem in Lower Mayfield.
But I think what we wanted to discuss was not the jointure, but re-examining the current zoning in the business district. That's all the supervisors instructed us to discuss. And the planning commission will take it up next week. But we're specifically thinking of adding new uses right now. It's the uses in our LI and OLI district are very businessy.
Mm-hmm.
It's office, research, and I guess if you wanted to, you could still, there are some very light manufacturing uses still in there. So we're looking at adding new uses more in keeping with what the world has become. It's too
Correct.
expensive to have warehouses in there.
And I think, in that case, one of the strongest markets, and it continues to be the strongest market, is multifamily, right? I mean, multifamily, the sort of modern, high-end rental apartments, which is what we do a lot of. What we're doing some of those in Lower Makefield.
That's
have really been-
something our chairman at the planning commission has been thinking about, an overlay that would permit multifamily housing, but he's right that everybody in Newtown complains about everything. So it's very difficult to put anything near somebody's house.
So I just want to sort of help you understand that it's not Newtown. Everybody everywhere complains about everything. Land use is, in my opinion, the only place where people feel like they can be heard, right? They can go to their local township meeting and complain. They may not have anything to complain about, but that doesn't matter. They will complain. I've heard everything. Most of it is actually thinly veiled racism, but there's people. The NIMBYism. There's a NIMBYism epidemic. Everybody knows what NIMBYism, right? Is
Yeah.
right? NIMBY, not in my backyard. There's other acronyms. There's bananas, which are build absolutely nothing and nowhere anytime. And there's also cave people, which are citizens against virtually everything.
Well, that's why I think our planning commission chairman is so interested in an overlay district, because as you can see from the map, we have a pretty contained business district. And if we were to add new uses, except for a couple of locations, you wouldn't be near anybody's house.
In fact, Mary, the way you said it was people don't want to have anything built near their house, but I think we're talking about the other way around.
Yes,
Where we're talking about putting residential near industrial.
but it would
Seth,
be
from your
new. So
experience-
if you moved in there, you'd already know what you were moving into.
Right. And Seth,
is
from your
different.
experience, do you think people who are, do the industrial property owners care if residential, are they resistant to residential in their neighborhood?
Well, we had one discussion one time at the planning commission, and I think, Karen, you may have been there, about allowing someone to develop one of these few undeveloped parcels into an apartment building.
Mhm.
And the industrial tenants didn't want to have to stop making noise at night, that sort of thing.
Seth, well, what's your experience? Have you run across that kind of resistance?
So what we have seen is a lot of less than, I mean, depends what your industrial uses actually are, right? I mean, do you really have heavy, noisy industrial uses in here? Because what we have seen is a lot of office parks, right? Because the office parks have also suffered quite a bit well before this pandemic, right? They were suffering 10 years ago because people just got sick of getting in their cars to drive to their offices. And then getting out of in their car at lunchtime to drive someplace. And so the suburban office market was really, really tough, whereas the urban office market was doing much better. So we have been involved in lots of overlays where office parks have had overlays to allow these residential uses. And in that case, the developers and the people who own the office parks welcome it because actually that makes the office park more attractive to possibly an office user because they can attract employees who live close to them. So that has been something. I am not familiar enough with the uses within this particular district to know whether I think there would be some kind of conflict between multifamily and not. I mean, I put multifamily right up against the turnpike. I mean, literally on the turnpike. So I don't know that there would be a conflict here. I mean, look, if I lived in an apartment building or if I was an apartment developer and I knew that I could provide some nice amenities, but also I was near the Newtown Athletic Club, which is like, resort, I would think that there would be a huge amenity associated with that.
Well, funny you should mention that because there were plans to build a complex, a residential complex near the Newtown Athletic Club. I don't know what's happened to that. And also outside of that district, you talking about a multi-use where you have commercial and residential. There was a plan to build something like that with, multi-unit dwellings over retail stores. But that was changed to just the housing development. So the developers themselves are not, really don't seem to me aggressively pursuing the idea that you're talking about in terms of mixing.
So here's the problem. Retail is really, really tough these days, right? Unless it's food. And now, I mean, take the current pandemic just out of context for, just remove that for a second. Retail has changed, right? And there's not a lot of mom and pop shops. We in this country have sort of destroyed our merchant class. So it's really about big box retailing, online retailing, or experiential retails, which is more of the mixed use area. There's not a lot of retail users out there. So the notion of doing something truly mixed use, vertically mixed use, which is you have retail on the ground floor and residential above, is very tough to achieve and can only work in certain places. It can work, but in less places than we'd like to see it work. In Lower Makefield, we're not doing that. They are separated. They're within pedestrian connections to one another. They're very close to one another, but we do not have residential over retail. We're permitted to do that, but we are not doing it there. I don't know that you would do it here either, because the retail would need one like really, really good visibility. Maybe you could turn Pheasant Run or into more of a mixed-use street, but I doubt it. I think here you're still going to have separation of land uses, but they're going to be a lot tighter and they're going to be a lot closer together. I live in Lower Merion. Here, the residential over retail does work. We can do that. I'm working on a project that's about to, we've actually been public with it, but we're going to have a big meeting in 2 weeks in Ardmore, where we're taking a huge super block and we're putting 200 and, what's the program again, Paul? You know this. It's 279 residential units and 4 stories over 50,000 feet of retail and 2 levels of underground parking and, it's going to be I think the sort of marquee multifamily development in the region. But it's in Lower Merion, it's near a train station, it's a much higher density area, and it's got great visibility.
Correct. That's your typical mixed use kind of
Right.
structure.
Correct. That won't work necessarily in this zone, but it would work. I mean, if there was a train station nearby that had really good visibility, yeah, maybe you could pull something like that off. Here, I think what you're looking at is adding a residential use, a permitted residential use at the right kind of density, a relatively high density on a per parcel basis that can help to start reinvigorating this area.
Well, from what I've heard, I'm not sure the Economic Development Committee has been really thinking strongly about residential use in that area. They're thinking about more different kinds of commercial use in that area than is currently allowed. I know, for example, they were interested in more restaurants, maybe.
I would like to step in and correct you there, John. We have had multiple conversations about mixed use specifically in this area. And in fact, within the past calendar year, we did draft a memo and present it to the board at some point about adding in an overlay for multifamily in this area.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't recall that, sorry.
Yeah, we had lengthy discussions and it's in your packets, that memo.
Okay. But it sounds like it's not a workable solution for this area, according to what Seth is saying.
No, what I'm saying is I think you can add those uses. I think what I would argue against is requiring residential over retail. I would allow residential as standalone. I would allow retail as standalone.
Okay, thank you.
I
I'm
would
sorry.
also
Yeah.
allow residential over retail. Don't prohibit it by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
But by requiring it is a problem.
Right, okay,
All right.
thank you.
That makes sense.
So when we speak about this at the Planning Commission, with overlay areas, we would just try to concentrate toward the middle, away from the current single-family residential homes inside the business district.
Well, one of the things you can do with an overlay is, let's say the overlay covered this entire area. You do things within the overlay that do prohibit certain uses within, say, 200 feet of a residentially zoned district, right? You could have a height limit that is, we're going to allow buildings at 60 feet in this district, but within 200 feet of a single family home, the height limit is 30 feet. Things like that. You can do all of that in an overlay. And also not affect the underlying use, which is the really important thing.
And it does kind of take away any issues with spot zoning.
That's exactly right. It takes the spot zoning completely out of the equation.
But
Now, that's not to say that overlays aren't really a legal way of doing spot zoning, because you can say in the overlay, a parcel has to be X amount of acres to qualify, and there may only be one that does that.
so even with an overlay, I mean, they could ask for variances, couldn't they, from the zoning hearing board?
That's a good question.
Yes, they can. And hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully who's ever writing the overlay is engaged with, I will tell you that every overlay that I have been engaged with, I have been involved with the person who's looking to develop the property, right? So the overlay is written specifically to allow that kind of development. So hopefully you don't need to go to the zoning hearing board. Not to say that I haven't been to the zoning hearing board in precisely those cases, but.
Okay, so again, what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but if you want to do an overlay, the first step is to find a developer who would like to do something and design the overlay for that, rather than doing an overlay first and then finding developers.
So it can be done both ways. Upper Dublin did it the second way that you just did. They did an overlay for the Fort Washington, the greater Fort Washington, the office park there, because they wanted to attract multifamily housing. One, because they knew from a fiscal standpoint, it would be very positive to the township. It would certainly help with the public schools and funding schooling. And two, they thought it would help the struggling office park. So from there, the township hired a planner who wrote the overlay. In other cases, like in Lower Makefield, the overlay is really sponsored by the development group itself. So it can happen both ways.
So what's the benefit of hiring a planner? I mean, we have a township planner, we have the planning commission. Do they have to hire a commercial planner, somebody outside?
No, they can certainly do the overlay themselves.
Well, I'm just wondering from the point of view of being, how shall I say, no conflict of interest. Is it better to hire somebody from outside who's a commercial planner, that's done something like this?
It's a good question. It depends on, I'd have to have a better understanding of who within the township or in the, I guess what do you call it, the tri-share, would be looking at it. I would certainly encourage them to at least consult with people who actually get things built and who work with developers, so they're not writing specific guidelines that actually make little poison pills, if you will, into the zoning that make it impossible to develop.
Well, I don't think people want to make it a poison pill, but I know you're talking about one of the things that everybody complains about is conflict of interest and who's making money from this and who's making money from that. I hear that a lot. So, I'm all in favor of a process that's more open, transparent, and something that can't be complained about like that, maybe.
Understood.
Anyway, it was a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, same here.
And again, I
Thank
just want to point, it's a massive oversimplification, but it gets the point across,
Okay.
right?
Thank you so much.
Very good.
You bet.
Yep.
You bet.
Mute that.
All right.
And what we would then, I guess, move forward with is Anthony. I didn't know if you had wanted to add anything on the discussion we were having there, if you had any questions about anything for our committee, or if you were just here to observe. I wanted to give you a little bit of time here to make sure that we didn't just, not give you time to talk here if you had any questions for us.
No, thank you. I was just going to say, the overlays I've seen, and we were involved with one in Lansdale that took some old industrial properties that were kind of dilapidated, and they were very successful. Hello?
Yep.
To Seth's point, really, it put apartments were developed, and a large industrial area which was shut down is now office around it. So it's all and they're next to a train station too. So you can have some real success stories from it.